Welcome to the City Club of Eugene's April 16th, 2021 program, Key Issue Update from Eugene Mayor Lucy Vinis. This is the 29th program of our 2020-2021 programming year. My name is Scott Coltrane, and I am the City Club President. Support for the City Club is provided by our members and sponsors. You can become a member of the City Club at our website, cityclubofueugene.org. Our programs are always available on our YouTube channel and on our Facebook page, and are broadcast on public radio station KLCC 89.7 on Mondays at 7 p.m. We have both business and in-kind sponsors, including our diamond sponsors, Kaiser Permanente, University of Oregon, Peace Health, and Lane Community College, as well as generous support from the City of Eugene and from Lane County. In today's program, we welcome Lucy Vinis, Mayor of Eugene, along with moderator Rachel McDonald, News Director of KLCC Radio. Biographical information on our speakers is available on our City Club website, cityclubofueugene.org. I would like to thank John Belcher and Skip Coburn for coordinating today's program. Today, Mayor Lucy Vinis will update the community on a few of the critical issues facing Eugene. KLCC's News Director, Rachel McDonald, will lead the discussion with a focus on 4 questions. What is the city doing about the issue of homelessness? What are the city's plans for reforming public safety? What programs are on the schedule for summer in the city? And what are some of the things you do as mayor of Eugene that the public doesn't often hear about? And why are those things important for the city's future? Our format today includes a question and answer period, moderated by John Belcher, with City Club members and guests via Zoom.
Hi, I'm Rachel McDonald with KLCC Public Radio, here with Eugene Mayor Lucy Vinis. Hi, Lucy.
Hi, thank you for having me here.
Great to have you. Great to be here. And I'm going to go ahead and launch into our questions, starting with, what is the city doing about homelessness?
Well, that is the big question. It is clear to all of us, seeing the tents and encampments throughout the city, that the past year of overlapping crises has worsened and increased the amount of homelessness in our community. People were already struggling with lost housing, couldn't access new housing, and our chronically homeless population, whose numbers already exceeded our capacity for services, are suffering even more because of reduced capacity in our longstanding programs like the Eugene Mission, Dusk to Dawn, and the limitations of the Egan Warming Centers. The wildfires and the wet winter created unbearable conditions that we have, frankly, been unable to fully mitigate. We are facing a humanitarian crisis, a huge humanitarian crisis. So I will answer this question in 3 parts. First, to refresh your memories on the ongoing work of the city to address homelessness, then to offer an update on the actions taken in 2020 in response to the pandemic, and then to close with just a few thoughts about the future and where we're going. So as you remember, in 2019, the City Council and the County Board of Commissioners approved 10 recommendations based on what we refer to as the TAC, Technical Assistance Collaborative Report, to improve programs to help people recover from homelessness. Throughout the pandemic, the work to implement those recommendations has continued. The recommendations included the creation of a 75-bed public shelter with a navigation center, which would direct guests to programs and services that they will help them move to stable, longer-term housing, medical care, and whatever other assistance they may need. In 2020, during the pandemic, the county purchased a former veterans medical clinic out on River Road and contracted with Occupy Medical to provide care for unsheltered people with COVID. We are planning to convert that medical clinic into our 75-bed shelter to open by July 2022. The 10 recommendations also call for the construction of 350 new units of permanent supportive housing. That is subsidized housing that comes with services associated with it. And one of those developments, the Commons on MLK, has already opened, and there are 3 others that are in the pipeline. There are 8 other recommendations in that TAC report, and those include things like improved outreach and more investment in diversion strategies, either to help people avoid homelessness or to divert them quickly out of homelessness. And there are some very county-specific recommendations in that report as well around accessing the coordinated care system. So all of the work is continuing on all of those levels as well, some of it less visible than others. As the pandemic began in 2020, it greatly reduced our shelter options because the need to prevent the gathering of people in large indoor spaces. So in response, the city of Eugene and Lane County actively engaged in locating and expanding alternative shelter options as quickly as we could. We did have the benefit of experience with our well-established alternative shelters. We had established dusk to dawn, in which people can have individual tents within a larger shelter. We have a longstanding overnight parking program that includes Conestogas as well as cars. We have rest stops that have a capacity up to 20, and we have Opportunity Village, with now Square One Village. So in each of these, people are there, what we refer to as non-congregate settings. And then thanks to coronavirus relief funds and state legislation in 2020, the city was able to increase the capacity at some of those existing sites. So we were able to add a capacity, say at the Dawn to Dawn site. And we were able to add 5 new rest stops, which you've kind of seen them gradually opening. One recently opened at Westmoreland Park. And those at full capacity will have 20 residents in each. And we added a new model that we call microsites that are just 6 units. And so those have, you've seen them mostly because the county has purchased what we call pallet shelters, these little white buildings, but they can be pallet shelters, or they can be Conestogas, they can be tents, but we have a number of those new microsites. So we added a little bit to our capacity, and state and federal funds also provided us with the funding, not only to establish those sites, but actually to contract with providers to extend services to those sites. So we were able to grow a little bit. The city has worked consistently and tried to continue to strengthen our partnerships with an increasing number of neighborhood and nonprofit groups who are serving the homeless. And it is, a testament to our community that the number of sort of grassroots and neighborhood groups that have stepped up to help. So there are familiar names there, Whitebird and Occupy Medical and Community Supported Shelter, Carry It Forward, but there's some new groups, The Way Home, Black Thistle. So there's a large constellation of providers, and we're working hard to coordinate closely with them. Also, to prevent virus spread, the Center for Disease Control guidance advised against disrupting or dispersing campsites. And so in response to those guidelines, the city has temporarily limited its enforcement of any urban camping in public places. So this winter in December, we issued an urban camping policy to clarify the required behavior and conditions at campsites that would allow people to remain in place. So Washington Jefferson Park now it's a very large campsite. It has close to 200 people. And city-owned property at 13th has about 80 people in campsites. And those are examples of places where we've established some rules. We are diverting a staff that would normally be parking staff. Some of them are serving as park hosts at those campsites so that we can manage that during the day. And again, we are counting on our providers to help extend some services to those folks. So those urban camping rules, that attempt to manage those sites and keep them as safe and sanitary as possible, the goal has been keep it safe for the campers and also keep it safe for the surrounding neighborhoods and reduce the need for us to disperse those campsites. That said, there are places that we have still required some intervention, and the urban camping policy designates places where we do not want people to camp. And so we've tried to put those up front so people won't set up a campsite in a place where we would ultimately have to move them. But, if there are sanitation issues, if there are behavior issues, if the police are called repeatedly to a site, we do have to intervene. And the community refers to these as sweeps, and there's a lot of outrage around them. But at a certain point, neighborhoods, businesses really sort of reach their limit of what they can withstand in terms of the overflow, the impact on their neighborhoods. And so we step in, and we count on the expertise of providers to help us manage this. So this is a temporary situation, but it's not going to be resolved that quickly. We're still in a pandemic. So you might ask, where are we headed? What's next? And I have two sort of key messages that I want to relay to the public about where we're going. And the first is that as you look to the city to solve both the acute crisis and the ongoing concerns of homelessness, please recognize the structure and the budget of the city government that you have. We have police and public works to address this issue. We do not have this level of social services in our city structure. The work we are doing now, we are doing by redirecting staff. I mentioned parking teams are working as park hosts. We have every city department is committing time and resources, and there's an interdepartmental team that meets weekly to coordinate their actions and come up with new options. It is our partnership with the county that is absolutely critical. Health and Human Services is the largest department of the county. It is what they do. The city has stepped up to meet this need because our citizens are compassionate and because we must do what we can in this crisis. But in the long term, sustainable solutions will be built on county, state, and federal investment. And there's good news here. Actually, we're recording this on the 8th, and just today, Secretary Fudge of Housing and Urban Development announced that her department was committing $5 billion to increasing affordable housing and to address homelessness. So those are funds that actually include in those funds the sort of non-congregate kinds of shelters that we have piloted here in Eugene. So that is very good news. There is assistance is on the way. But still, we are behind, and it takes time. And what I say about this is that we're really holding in our parks and open spaces and streets the legacy of decades of neglect and underfunding in sort of critical services. And turning that around is going to require investment at all levels, and actually may lead to some different decisions locally about how we structure our service delivery. So we clearly need better coordination and more resources. We need to allocate those in the most effective way possible. So the question is out there: should the city and the county consider developing a joint housing and homelessness division, as they have done in Portland and Multnomah County? Would the public support a revenue source, a new revenue source, a bond, a levy, a fee, some form of tax that would support those more robust services? What does the community, how does the community envision the city stepping up into this role and envision that partnership with the city and the county? My second thought about where we're going is that in the shorter term, I am increasingly focused on the need to connect with people and deliver services to them where they are. The scale and the scope of this humanitarian crisis and the incremental pace at which we are able to continue to create new shelter and housing opportunities means that we are simply not going to be able to shelter or house the roughly 2,000 people living in our parks, open space, and rights of way in the short term, in the now. We're just not going to get there that fast. We need to build the capacity to shelter more people in a wider variety of locations, so they're in smaller groups, and we need to be able to deliver services to them in order to meet their immediate needs and to keep our neighborhoods and the homeless campers safe and protected from issues like crime and lack of sanitation and other health risks. I am continuing and increasingly advocating for the county to expand their investment in outreach. It is one of the 10 recommendations of the TAC report, and I think it's an essential part of our immediate response. We've been doing that increasingly through this pandemic, and I am particularly interested in how we could create a more robust outreach system. I'm very interested in if there's a way that we could collaborate with our various educational institutions to create a pipeline of sort of field experience, practicums for students who are in counseling or social work or in the medical fields, and sort of create a pipeline where students are learning here, they're getting some field experience, and they're also doing some work to help us in the city sort of meet this very critical need. So I look forward to having more conversations about how we can do that work. And then a final comment I will make is the city council is having a work session on this topic on April 12th, and we're recording this session before that council meeting has happened. So I can't reflect on what that conversation is going to be like or what information is shared, but I would encourage listeners to this and viewers to this session to go back, and if you don't have a chance to pay attention to that work session, because we're devoting the entire 90 minutes to this conversation. And, the staff does what they do based on council direction. So it's up to council if we want to try and take a different course or invest more funds or more resources.
Thank you. What are the city's efforts to reform public safety?
Thank you. That's the other hot topic of the year, I would say. And so I'm going to frame my response to this question similarly to the way I framed the first one, kind of in three parts. And the first is a review of our ongoing commitments to public safety reform, a reminder about our community safety initiative and what that is and how that evolved. And then finally, council's response to the killing of George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter protests of last summer. So first, a little background on, just to give everyone the framework of where the city has been on police safety reform, public safety reform. So the city of Eugene, city council and the police have implemented a number of reforms over the past 15 years. The police commission was established in 1998 to provide policy review and recommendations. In 2006, the council established the Office of the Independent Police Auditor and the Civilian Review Board to create a transparent process for complaints and to make policy recommendations to the police department and the police commission. The auditor is hired by the council, so reportable directly to the council. Under our former police chief, Pete Kearns, the EPD began initial steps to implement the Obama administration's 21st century policing reforms, which call for police policies to be built on trust, oversight and training, and community policing. And in 2017, the EPD began to require all officers to wear body-worn cameras. The police have also implemented de-escalation training. They've monitored bias in police stops and, of course, have a 30-year relationship with Cahoots in responding to people in crisis on the streets. So that background infrastructure actually gives us a pretty solid footing on which to plan our next steps in improving equity and accountability and transparency. So my second piece of information is sort of to remind you all about the Community Safety Initiative and how that developed and what that encompasses. So that initiative was approved by council in 2019. The initiative was based on statistics that revealed that our police department was not able to respond to 30% of their calls for service. And they were often very delayed in their response when it was anything other than, an immediate risk of life. And we all know this. I mean, I often say about Eugene that we don't actually know what it would be like to have a robust policing system where police actually responded to your car when it's broken into. I mean, we're so used to being under-resourced. The staffing in our police department has really held level for decades, even though the population and the size of the city has continued to grow. So when Chief Skinner came on board, he worked with staff to develop a more robust safety system that would respond both to longstanding needs and also invest in some of our emerging solutions. So for example, the CSI invests in more personnel. That's the biggest part of it. It invests in both in uniformed police, in armed police officers, and in unarmed community safety service officers, and in 911 services. It funds an expansion of the municipal court. It invests in services for homeless youth and adults, and it supports our community court, which is a means by which minor offenders can be diverted out of the justice system and into kind of community service and services. And the main beneficiaries of that tend to be people who are unsheltered because they tend to bump up against those sort of minor crimes. That the initiative allocates specific funds to meet specific needs. It's a separate funding. It's outside of the general fund. It's a separate fund. And before it was approved by council, the chief and other staff met with an array of community organizations and individuals to talk about safety needs, to explain what the stats revealed about the EPD and the thoughts about how this would improve our services. And as you will know, the council also approved a payroll tax in order to fund this expansion of our public safety system. And we started to receive the revenue from that tax just this year, starting in January. So that now brings us up to speed and brings me to the events of last summer and the killing of George Floyd and the demands of the Black Lives Matter protests. So in response to those protests, the demand in the protest that we heard was, to defund the police, to divert funds from police services to other services like cahoots. And council, in response to those demands, recognized the importance of devoting a little more time to talking to members of the BIPOC and LGBTQ communities to just gain a better understanding and insight into their priorities for our public safety system. So council directed staff to convene focus groups, as well as to convene 2 community engagement sessions, which just wrapped up last month at the end of March. So staff is now compiling that additional insight into the community safety initiative and our proposed investments. And that'll come back to council later this spring. And an important point here is that the community safety initiative, it is a separate chunk of funds. So we can't move funds in or out of it because it's funded with its own separate payroll tax, but there is room to make reallocations within that. So the expectation is that there'll be some recommendations that come out of this second round of community conversations that would say shift more into the community court than the municipal court. I don't know what those recommendations are going to be, but that's what we're looking at. The other response of council to last summer was the creation of an ad hoc committee on police policies. And the ad hoc committee it's a committee that convenes for a specific purpose and for a limited duration. So in this case, the council direction was very specific about the composition of the committee membership and the timeline for delivering recommendations back to council. And as a framework for these discussions, council directed that the committee use the 21st Century Policing Framework and also consider the guidelines delineated in Campaign Zero, which is a list of recommended reforms related to police tactics. The ad hoc committee includes representatives from 13 organizations. Each organization was invited to send 2 representatives to the committee. And they're primarily from the Eugene's BIPOC and LGBTQ communities. So organizations like Central Latino, Black Unity, Transponder, and LULAC, they're all sent, NAACP, all sent representatives. And then I appointed 4 additional representatives to make sure that we had rounded it out. So it started out with 30. They divided their work into 5 subcommittees: use of force, independent investigation and prosecution, hiring and training, community oversight, and body-worn cameras. I have listened to most of these meetings. I listened to the meeting last night, and I will expect, it's a very long list of recommendations, and they fall sort of broadly into 3 categories. We haven't seen the report yet, but I think there will be issues that will be sort of readily actionable by the city, questions around de-escalation training and what training we use and how to require that, I think will be actionable. There will be issues that require longer term review and are more complex to implement. And then there are recommendations that are really aspirational, that really fall outside the city council's purview to establish. So as I mentioned, I would expect there'll be recommendations around hiring and training and de-escalation requirements. The committee in the longer term has devoted a lot of discussion to the roles and authority of the Civilian Review Board and the independent police auditor. So, that will require a much deeper dive into looking at that structure that we have created. And then there are motions, some of which, we're watching the state legislation proceed also on police tactics. And so there's some things that really are at the state level that are not at the city level. But this committee is weighing in on those because they wanted their voices to be part of the record. So they're wrapping up their work. Their final meeting is April 21st. And then those recommendations will be incorporated into a report that the city council will receive just later this spring. And I will say, I know this is a long answer, but I will say that, throughout 2020, the calls for police services has not gone down. And if anything, it's gone up. In this pandemic year, hate crimes have continued unabated, and many neighborhoods and businesses have complained repeatedly of vandalism and shoplifting and theft, and so the police have been busy. So reforms to our whole public safety system and police reforms are they're urgent, they're important. Getting it right takes time. This committee of 30 people has really slaved over this work. It has been a very deep dive and very hard. I think the next big challenge, once we get the recommendations, will be to respond to that both in a respectful way, and that may not be the fastest way. So I think what I anticipate is sort of integrating those recommendations into the city's ongoing work and looking at ways in which we continue to integrate those voices and those perspectives into the city's ongoing work. And, we have some things on our side. We have a police chief who is all on board with this process. We have a strong interim police auditor. We have a police commission. We have a city manager and a council who are all invested in doing this and doing it well. And we have, an informed and energized citizenry that really wants to create a community in which everyone feels safe and receives the public safety services that they need and want. So, it's not an easy path, but we're on a good path.
And looking ahead into your crystal ball, will we be returning to having cultural events in person this summer?
Yes, we will. So that's, we will see a return to gathering in person. The city has a long list of opportunities, and we are working with many arts organizations as they all are kind of rebuild their capacity to reopen to the public. And, I just want to say, quickly express my deep gratitude to the arts organizations, because they have suffered deeply, and people involved in the arts, performers, backstage crews, galleries, they've lost employment, and so we're all eager to see them back on the stage, back in our performance venues, back in our street activities. But I will say there, a cautionary note, that as we begin to reopen more programs, people should still expect that these cultural events will be a fraction of the size that they have been pre-pandemic. I mean, they'll come back slowly. They'll still have to adhere to COVID guidelines. And so it will be gradual, but fortunately the good weather is coming, right? So we can have more outdoor activities, and that allows more people to gather safely. So a couple of quick things: recreation centers and cultural services are working with local performing groups for live events in neighborhoods, such as outdoor galleries and outdoor concerts. There'll be some in-person programs like story times will resume at the Eugene Public Library. The Holt Center is already starting to allow small audiences to come for indoor performances. And there's a long list of outdoor events happening. So the Asian celebration this year has decided to celebrate outdoors in the park blocks every Friday night through May. So that's coming quickly. Later this month, we have National Dance Week. In the summer, there'll be the Mayor's Art Show and the Visual Arts Week. And all of those things, they'll all come up on the website. So it's coming back. It'll come back gradually, but.
And what are some things that you do as mayor of Eugene that the public doesn't often hear about? And why are those things important to the city?
Yeah, thank you. I will say that in my first term, I was deliberately very careful and limited in the ways I became involved with activities outside Eugene, Lane County, and Oregon. I was deeply focused on doing the day-to-day work as mayor in Eugene, and I did not want to spread myself too thin. But as you all know or can imagine, in my first term, even pre-pandemic, there were climate change, housing and homelessness challenges, targeting of immigrant communities, and a surge in hate and bias crimes. They all called for immediate local action, and the national climate did not help. I describe this feeling as Sisyphus pushing a boulder up the hill and the former federal administration putting downward pressure on it to make it even harder for us to do that work. And now we have an administration that's helping us lift. It's a very different feeling. But in my first term, I felt that cities had to lead the way because the federal government wasn't going to lead the way. And seeing that cities, and our city being among them, needed a strong voice, I thought that collective action with other cities was really important. And I joined 4 national organizations: Climate Mayors, the U.S. Conference of Mayors, Mayors and CEOs for U.S. Housing Investment, and Accelerator for America, a new partnership for infrastructure. So the Climate Mayors enable me to join my voice with other cities to restore our commitment to the Paris Climate Agreement. This strengthens our potential to work with our Congressman, Peter DeFazio, to advocate for the kind of federal investment we need in broadband and transit and electric vehicles and electrification in general. The U.S. Conference of Mayors provides a platform for me to present our work in Eugene at panels related to housing, homelessness, transportation, and infrastructure. Among other issues, the Trump administration, in the Trump administration, we faced a Federal Communications Commission that was bent on restricting local control of our rights of way in favor of the telecom industry. Eugene has been a leader in this fight, and I have taken that advocacy to other mayors to join us. The Mayors and CEOs for U.S. Housing Investment was relatively new organization in my first term in office, and met for a couple of years. And then we just convened last Friday in a meeting with the White House leadership. I joined 10 other mayors in that meeting and making very specific requests around assistance and guidance we need to meet our whole continuum of housing needs, from shelter to permanent supportive housing to market rate housing. That group advocates for housing as infrastructure, and which I think is sort of the essential framework. And so we're seeing that perspective reflected in President Biden's, actually all of his work, but both in the rescue plan and in the American Jobs and Infrastructure Plan. So, we're on strong footing to make that case, and we have a receptive administration now. And then finally, the Accelerator for America is an initiative started by LA Mayor Eric Garcetti And their priorities outlined in the new playbook on infrastructure. And I was a contributing mayor to the concepts in that new playbook. And it advocates for accelerating community-driven responses to climate, investing in local businesses and workforce innovation, and maximizing our investment in with recovery funds. So I've come to see that national work as vital. And I think now that we do have an administration that really wants to work with us, being positioned in those national organizations helps me keep our priorities and our needs up front and center. And in some ways, in many ways, Eugene is a leader. So we have a chance to model for other cities as well.
Thank you.
Okay, now we're going to take some questions from City Club members. The first one is from Andrew Collett.
Thank you very much, John, and thank you, Mayor, for being with us. My question is about the bounty of markets that we now have in our city on Saturdays. This past Saturday was the first Saturday where the farmers market moved from the park blocks back to 5th, right near the redeveloped 5th Street Market. And yet the Eugene Saturday market remains on the park blocks. And I wondered, isn't there some opportunity for cross-pollination there? How do we get folks who are at the farmers market to walk those few blocks to the Saturday market and vice versa? So I wondered if you had any comment about that or ways to track how that divided market is working in these early months. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Andrew. That's actually a terrific question. And our goal, right, is to encourage the community to be walking back and forth. We really do want that foot traffic, and we want it to be safe. So, and this is all a precursor to opening up to the riverfront. So we really are aiming as a city for a pathway that connects downtown 5th Street Market and the new riverfront development. And that riverfront park will be opening also in July. So I think that actually as we get into the warm weather and people feel like strolling, they're realizing that they can, it's a pleasant walk from the Saturday market to the farmer's market out to the river and back. It will make an expedition. So, it'll be interesting. I think I haven't heard a specific plan from the city about how we might sort of mark that pathway for folks. And maybe that's a good idea for me to sort of check in with staff about, are we going to do some markings on the sidewalks, or we have done during, Visual Arts Week, we've done some extra signage that shows up in the city that says this mural is here and that mural is there. And so, we could do something like that, and it probably would be a good idea to look. And for all I know, city staff are way ahead of me and they've got a plan, and I just don't. I have to find out what it is.
Thanks so much, Mayor.
Yes, thank you both. Next question is from Sue Walling.
Hi, Mayor Vinis. Thanks for speaking to us today. And amid all the other crises you've been dealing with, there's the ongoing crisis about climate action. And Eugene has a great climate action plan. And the council has even taken some actions like against Northwest Natural. I really appreciate that. But there is a sentiment that, the climate action plan is kind of aspirational and voluntary and unfunded. In fact, I think the Sustainability Commission presented a list of proposals about how to fund it, how to make it really happen. So I guess I was wondering what's your perspective on, is this really something that's going to happen? Does it need more funding? How do we move forward on it?
I think both things are true. I think we're actually moving forward on many things, and I think we need to invest more in it. And I think when you think about, so much of our climate work is integral to the work that we're already doing. So as we look at, for instance, as we look at our build out of Franklin Boulevard as a safer multimodal pathway, those are federal dollars. We're not explicitly saying this is a climate project, but we are very specific about the need for improved, active, and transit in our community in order to get people out of our cars and reduce our carbon footprint. I think when we look at housing and we look at our housing policies, it's an established policy for us. We are looking to create different housing types. We're required now to do it with House Bill 2001, different housing types that are more compact, that are more efficient in their energy uses. I think we're looking to how can the new housing be more electric, renewable power. So I think there are pieces like that that are sort of slower moving and not very showy, but they're actually integral to the work that the city is doing. And so they consistently roll out. The city itself has, invested in, low greenhouse gas, low emission paving systems. And, we've invested in LED lights. So that work is ongoing. At the same time, infrastructure development, electrification, these housing, they require money. There are a lot of proposals within the Climate Action Plan 2.0 that require not just money to do, but staffing. We have right now, as you know, we have basically 2 staff people that are overseeing our entire climate action plan, and really to move forward faster on some of the ideas that are contained in that plan. We actually need more robust staffing. I do think that the positive thing is right now, partly because of the economic crisis, we have an American Rescue Plan from the Biden administration. We have an American Jobs and Infrastructure Plan, very knitted together with climate, large amounts of money. And, and so we have an opportunity to tie those pieces together with some resources that are going to come from the federal government that we haven't had before. So I think, at least in the short term, I think you're going to see more robust investment in some of those pieces, and in the but we're in an economic recovery. And so the extent to which we do 2 things at a time is how we get them the best bang for the buck right now.
Thanks once again. Mary Layton, would you like to ask a question?
Yes. Hi, Mayor Vinis. It's about housing. I walk with my grandchildren, just to get them out of the house. And I notice in Southeast Eugene, there is this wonderful array of housing that only seems to occupy the footprint of a moderate-sized house in Southwest, but in fact has several different families in it. Why can't we build more low income, not affordable, but low income housing in small pods all across the city in every ward, instead of concentrating them all downtown or in 50-unit buildings or in the Whitaker? What is the obstacle to having smaller, cheaper, supported housing in the other neighborhoods?
Yeah, I think there are longstanding barriers that we are actually trying to remove, and some of that pressure is coming from the state. Again, House Bill 2001 is pushing us in that direction, but we have done our own in that respect with our Envision Eugene work and our push to develop along transit corridors with transit-oriented development. We are the council actually had an update at their last meeting in March, which I think was on March 10th, about housing tools and strategies. And that series of workshops was to look specifically at the question you're asking, how do we increase housing affordability and availability in our community? And that workshop came up with 80 strategies. And a dozen of those strategies sort of internal administrative processes, and the remainder, the bulk of them, were larger. There were questions around accessory dwelling units, around duplexes and fourplexes and where we build them. So that work is now at a much higher pace. Housing Tools and Strategies is now talking about having a housing innovation plan. So they'll take all of the pieces, the questions about system development charges, the questions about ADUs, the input that we get in our response to how we implement House Bill 2001, they'll all be put together in one sort of larger strategic implementation plan for the city. So we are trying in a systematic way rather than a piecemeal way to come up with a broader plan. And I say that, the direct answer, there are two pieces. One is that it's just as expensive to build housing at the lower economic cost, at the lower cost of purchase or rent, as it is to build an expensive house. And yet the builder doesn't have it just doesn't balance out in terms of the cost and what a builder will earn from making that investment. So we have looked to incentives. I mean, was the reason that we created a construction excise tax, so we would have a little local chunk of money so that we could help incentivize. I think if you look at 2001, look at how are we going to incentivize? How can we increase to incentivize along corridors? And I think as we look at the Biden administration and their infrastructure plan and their investment in housing, and this, I mentioned earlier, this $5 billion in affordable housing and homeless solutions from HUD, as we look at that, we're going to look at an infusion of money that would enable us either to do land banking to purchase land, or that would enable us to, increase our incentives and offer other benefits. So, I think we're actually we've done a lot of the homework, and I think we are poised to do more, but so but we're so far behind. So I think everyone's struggling with, can we build it fast enough? How do we build it faster? How do we move it faster? I made a specific request in the call with the White House on Friday around land banking, and we've included a land banking request in our sort of wish list to the state legislature as well, because if the city could purchase more land more quickly, both with federal and state funds, then we could have that land banking there, and we can use it potentially for sites as emergency shelter now, but then we would have that capacity to build more housing. So I think all of those pieces are in play. What happens in our residential neighborhoods now in response to House Bill 2001, how many duplexes, fourplexes, cottage clusters, townhomes, what gets built, and then what can we do at the other end just to build more housing that people can afford.
Once again, Joel Corin, would you like to ask your question?
Yes, I would. Mayor, last week's City Club program dealt with the plans for the riverfront development, and they are pretty exciting plans. And I think that when that is built, Center City will not shift, it will expand to the riverfront. Given that, is it time to relook at the eWeb building as a site for City Hall?
I think that ship has sailed, Joel. I think that council has really made their final decision about the eWeb building being a city hall. And, I'm trying to think exactly when we had this last meeting, but it was within the last couple of months where we kind of released eWeb to go ahead and put that building on the market. So the council has released them that the city they don't have to wait for the city to decide whether to purchase the eWeb building or not. They can put it on the market. The city still has the option of purchasing that building. But I think that, two things. Council went through many deliberations about the pros and cons of the eWeb building, the cost, what it would take to retrofit it to suit our needs, what eWeb expected in terms of payment for that building, and what the city was prepared to pay. So we put that all aside. And then, right now we have other issues that are higher priority. And I think we've made a decision as a council that we're investing in the farmers market, creating the permanent farmers market, doing that modification to that block because it's an economic generator, because we want to support our local farmers and that market. and that sort of takes precedence over the conversation about City Hall right now. So the conversation about City Hall will come back, but it's not at the top of council's agenda right now.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let's see, we have Rachel McDonald with a question.
Hello again, Mayor. The pandemic has upended our lives, and we've had to make huge adjustments and changes and sort of pivot in the way we do business. And as we do look ahead to opening up and hopefully getting back to whatever normal looks like, are there things that you think will be forever changed by this pandemic and how we do things, maybe how the city does things, how we use our spaces, and just what do you think we might be carrying forward with us beyond this time?
That is a great question, and it's the question where I think every city is asking this question: what is it going to look like when we come back? Yeah, on the positive side, I think as much as we're all eager to be back in person and a little tired of Zoom, on the positive side, Zoom has made it possible for a higher level of community engagement in a couple of really important community conversations. So I think that is a lesson that we are definitely taking forward. And I will be interested to see if when council starts to meet in person again, if we're still able to have a Zoomed testimony by members of the public, so people really can continue to come, because our public forums have been robust. When you think about the ad hoc committee, 30 people with many, many hours, but they were able to do it in their own homes. And so there's a huge advantage there. I am hoping also that we have very much a lower incidence of flu, because we'll all get into the habit of putting on masks during flu season when we're out in public, and we won't be as sick as often. I think some of those things will change. I was actually, heard a story on KLCC this morning, in fact, about this, people feeling some level of anxiety about whether they really wanted to go back to their pell-mell kind of existence, pre-pandemic, around from one thing to the other, working, whether they want to sort of be able to slow down a little bit. So I think those conversations will be very interesting around what makes what is the role of a workplace? Does everybody need to go to the office every day? Are we going to have staggered work schedules? What is that going to mean for office space in any city, not just ours? What's our need for office space going to look like? So I think there's, and I think even for the schools, I think there are some children who have really thrived in the remote learning because they're not distracted. So, it'll be interesting to see what pieces we keep and what pieces we're just happy to be done with.
Thank you. And I want to ask a question. Mayor Vinis, and this kind of ties together several of the pieces you've already talked about, and that's House Bill 2001. I'm glad to hear that you recognize that we need to do something about housing affordability and affordable housing in a way that just passing the code won't help. But I'm also very intrigued and impressed, and want to get your feedback about how the planning department has gone about getting input on this process. We have the Healthy Democracy Group, which is a group of 30 folks randomly selected who are being given information and giving feedback. There's several groups, the elected officials and boards, but general folks in that way. You've done a survey, you've created planner in a box. There's a whole bunch of stuff that's out there that we haven't done before, and I'm curious to know what you're hearing about that and whether that's a trend for the future.
Yeah, thank you. That is a great question. And I think the work that the planning team has done in terms of eliciting insight and gathering information has been inspiring and inspired. And so I think there are lots of takeaways from that that whole process. I thought the healthy democracy process of sort of this randomized group of people, we tapped into a group of people who really have not weighed in on housing issues before. I mean, so I do think that it's given us a sense of there are lots of other ways to do this, to hear from a broader sector of the community. And I think that, you know, in the end result is going to be such a strong result, which is that we really will have heard what people want. We really have heard, I think so far, really have heard that people do want us to kind of maximize this opportunity to create different forms of housing that are more affordable, that are, you know, more accessible and provide different ranges for folks. And they really do want us to incentivize the kind of housing that we want. I think that message has come through pretty loud and clear so far. So I think the work has been phenomenal and puts us in very, very strong footing. And a lot of those tools, I could see that all those tools being used in other conversations in other ways.
Well, thank you very much.
This has been our April 16th, 2021 program. Key issue update from Eugene Mayor Lucy Vinis. Before we proceed, I'd like to recognize our diamond sponsors. Kaiser Permanente exists to provide high-quality, affordable healthcare services and to improve the health of our members and the communities we serve. More information at www.kp.org. Support comes from the University of Oregon. Since 1876, UO has helped Oregonians question critically, think logically, reason effectively, communicate clearly, act creatively, and live ethically. More information at uoregon.edu. Peace Health is proud to serve Eugene, Lane County, and beyond. As your hometown healthcare partner for more than 80 years, our mission is to keep you and your family healthy. Learn more at peacehealth.org. Lane Community College transforms lives through learning. LCC provides comprehensive, accessible, high-quality educational opportunities that promote student success. For more information, visit lanecc.edu. I would also like to acknowledge our gold sponsors, Jerry Diethelm, architect and landscape architect, Luvash Cobb, and AARP of Oregon. Before we thank our speakers today, I have a few more quick announcements. Thank you to our in-kind sponsors, KRVM 91.9 Radio, Pack Info and Simplified Computing LLC, and Dotson's Photography. And a special thank you to public radio station KLCC FM 89.7 for airing City Club programs on Mondays at 7 p.m. Our programs are always available on our YouTube channel and on our Facebook page. If you are a City Club of Eugene member, you can ask a question at a future taping of our programs. If you are not a member, you can join and then participate. More information is on our website. Our next program next week will look at Oregon legislature as it tackles equity in policing. More details and information about future programs can be found online at the City Club's website, cityclubofelugene.org. Now, I would like to thank today's speaker for a great program. Mayor Lucy Vinis, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts with us about some important city issues in Eugene. This concludes today's program. Be well and stay safe.